Let's have an introduction to variables in Python. Let's assume I need a space in memory where I can store a number. Now, how can I assign a memory space and store data in it and then be able to reference to that memory space and retrieve the data? Well, it's simple. You can name that memory space anything you want to a certain extent. I'll show you the rules for that in a minute. So for now, let's say we call it A. Okay, now if I hit a space bar here, notice I have a little wiggly line under it in red, which means it's an incomplete statement. So you need to assign something to it. That is the variable name. So I'm going to do an equal. Equal is for assignment. And let's say I store in it the number 7. There. That's it. That's all it takes to store a number in memory. And if you want to retrieve it, you could actually output to the console or the screen A. So in its basic form, you assign a value and retrieve it. So input in a way to memory, output from memory to console. So let's run this for a minute and see what happens. And there you have it. So 7 displays as your output. Okay? That's in its simplest form. Okay? Now, we could make it a little more meaningful. Instead of calling it A, I call it mynum, or my number if you want. So some people like to be a little more verbose as to what the variable name should be. Okay, so now we've assigned my number. We've assigned it 7, so 7 is actually stored in memory. Notice now that A here in the print statement has a red squiggly line. That is because A does no longer exist. Okay, so it doesn't exist. So we never declared or used A, or as you can see I'm highlighting here, it says unresolved reference A, right? So what do you do for the output? Well, you have to be consistent. If you used my number to put 7 in it, then if you want to retrieve that 7 back out, you need to do this, my number. Okay, so that will again give us the same output we just did before. Okay, now in here I stored a number. Could I store another number in memory? So I'm not allocated just one space. Can I have my other number and put a -9 in there? Sure. Okay, can I print it? Absolutely. So I can go ahead and do a print my other number. Notice the IDE here gives you choices. We're going to look at all the features that an IDE might have in terms of filling in the blank. Here you go. So now I have two print statements. One will print my number and the other one will print my other number, right? We know that my number has 7 and my other number has -9. So we should get a 7 and a -9 printed out to the screen, or to the console in our case, right here. So that's what we get. Now, what if I didn't say my other number and I actually wrote my number again? Okay, now notice now my other number doesn't exist anymore. Let's just take it out for a minute. So what happens when you assign 7 to my number and then you assign -9 again to my number? Well, 7 goes to bit heaven. It's gone. What you have done here is you've written over that memory location, right? So that's an overwrite over that memory location. So the last thing you did is what will be stored in memory. This is very important in terms of computing. What was the last thing you did at that memory location referenced by that variable? As you can see, you get -9. Okay, so now how about naming conventions for variables? Well, you notice here that I used my number, so it's a kind of meaningful versus A, right? Which doesn't really tell us a lot as to what it's supposed to be doing. The conventions, you could write it up as such, underscore my number if you wanted to, if it's 2 words, right? Make sure you are consistent on both ends. So now we have my number and my number, right? So if we run this again, we get the same result. Do not leave a blank like this, right? Even if you keep it consistent, notice I'm going to get a red squiggly line. This means it's a syntax error. All right? So you could either collapse them together or put an underscore. Okay? Here's another thing. Don't put a number in front of it. Even if you stay consistent, you will still get a squiggly line. You try to run this, you're going to get an error here. All right? So it's trying to interpret that 1 in front of it. So no numerical values at the beginning. Could I do a 1 at the end? Absolutely. So that's nice, because then if I need 2 separate memory locations, and let's say my number 2, and then we're going to do equal to 7.9. It doesn't have to be, numbers do not have to be integers. They could be float numbers like this. Then I can print both of them right here. And notice here, my number 2. So I'm just going to print them right next to each other. Okay, so if you want some space in between them, then you could do something like this, right? And there you go. If you want to control that space, you could do a /t, which is, this gives me, /t gives me, this is an escape character. That gives me a tab between the two. So as you can see, even a little more space. So as you can see in the print statement, we're going to revisit print statement in an official manner where we can combine the outputs into one print statement, okay? Or into one line. The important lesson right now, before I conclude, is that we give a meaningful name to a variable we're going to be using and assign it a value. Now, do they have to be just numbers? Now, notice here, as far as numbers are concerned, we've stored an integer, we've stored a float. Heck, you can store a complex number. My number 3, and then you could say something like this, complex, and let's put 4, comma, -1. Okay, now that's a complex number, okay, and in our next lesson, we're going to learn how to handle something like this. If you try to print this, what is the real part and the imaginary part? So if some of you have done this in math, a complex number expressed in this manner means the first argument is the real side and the -1 is minus. So let me write a comment next to it, and this is how we write comments in Python. And real equals 4, and imaginary equals -1. So we have two components to a complex number, real and imaginary. Now, another expression of this could have been written, a complex number in a rectangular form could be written like this, 4 plus, in our case, it would be a -1j, or something like that. Or you might see I, or you might see I1. Depends which field of mathematics you're in or engineering, okay? So let me just remove this. By the way, this has no effect on your program if I run this. Watch this, okay? And we haven't done anything with this complex number. It's no big deal. We're going to be reviewing this next time on how to handle something like this. So what else can you do? How about my name? And my name, well, the fact that I called it my name, my intent out of this variable is to store a string or a collection of characters, or to actually store my name. So I'm going to put Drew in here. There. So if you're not dealing with numbers and you're dealing with a string, then you could put a string and you can assign it to that variable. If I try to print that, notice it's simply, you dereference it just like we did with anything else, my name. And if I run this, there you go. So again, the next lesson, we're going to review some of this, how to handle complex numbers. For some of you are going to be in engineering, it's going to be important, or some section is in mathematics. Definitely, we're going to learn how to handle integers and floats and strings. So I will see you again for the next lesson.